long before I wrote the book, I would go on college campuses and I would talk about tax cuts or whatever, and kids would say, some kid would say, some kid with like open-toed shoes and a closed mind would say, well, that sounds fascist. And I always used to like to ask them, can you explain something to me? Except for the murder, bigotry, genocide, and war, what is it exactly about Nazism that you don't like? And they would always look at me with this sort of pierced, tongue-tied silence, sort of like the way my old basset hound would look at me when I would try to feed it a grape, just sort of total unblinking incomprehension. And then I would run through this long list, which I'm not going to do a whole list because I'm not here to talk about a 10-year-old book, but I would run through this long list, and among the things I would point out was the Nazis were socialists. The Nazi ideologist Greta Strasser, he explained this pretty well. I mean, it's a little abstruse, but I think this quote works. He said, and I'll read this exactly, "We are socialists." He then went on to say, "We are enemies, deadly enemies of today's capitalist economic system with its exploitation of the economically weak, its unfair wage system, its immoral way of judging the worth of human beings in terms of their wealth and their money." The first speech that attracts Adolf Hitler to the Nazi Party was titled, "How and by what means is capitalism to be destroyed?" The Nazi Party platform, which was co-written by Hitler in 1920, demanded guaranteed jobs, the abolition of incomes unearned by work, which was basically sort of a Elizabeth Warren approach to finance, the nationalization of all large corporations and trusts, profit sharing in all industries, expanded old age insurance, a government takeover of big department stores, sort of like what people are trying to do with Walmart, the prohibition of child labor, and all sorts of other progressive reforms. I could do the same thing all day long with Benito Mussolini, who's actually the guy who coins fascism. It's where fascism comes from, is Italy, not from Germany. There's a big debate among scholars about whether or not Nazi Germany was even fascist, but that gets very technical, and we're not going to do that. But Benito Mussolini was a socialist. He earned the title Il Duce as the head of the Italian Socialist Party, not the Italian Fascist Party. His father used to read Das Kapital to him as a bedtime story. The name Benito isn't even Italian, it's Spanish. He was named after Benito Juarez, the Mexican leftist revolutionary. So one of the things I used to do when I would give the liberal fascism talk is I would apply the Visitor from Mars test. And the Visitors from Mars test is, this is one of the things that made the book so controversial, was that I actually defined my terms. And it's really easy to call someone a fascist when you define it as everything you don't like. Right? It's much harder when you actually say, okay, here's what they believe in terms of public policy, here's what they believe in this. And so I would lay out all the different things that fascist regimes, believed. And say, you have a visitor from Mars, and you give him this checklist, and you have him walk around the 20th century. There is no way that an objective observer who wasn't preloaded with all the biases and spin and rhetoric wouldn't identify fascist Italy and Nazi Germany as some kind of socialism. They weren't.